The
Yeah.
adolescent culture is a recent thing.
Yeah.
There was no adolescent culture
Right.
60 years ago.
Right.
They used to, years ago, when they had, 20, 30, 40 kids in a grade, they
Uh-huh.
would take pictures, they would take their senior pictures, and they would put them on a big poster,
Hmm.
maybe like 3 feet by 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it would say St. Charles High School and class of 1961 or 1948. I mean, they go way back.
Wow. Cool.
And they'd have each kid on there, and they'd have the principal and the superintendent. Very, very formal. And you looked at those kids, my goodness, they looked like they're 28.
Yeah.
They had their hair combed
Yeah.
in an adult fashion, parted
Yeah.
on the side. They had a suit and a tie. The women had nice dresses on.
Yeah.
Every senior picture looked like someone who was ready to move into the adult world.
Yeah. So, welcome. This is part 2. We're going over this. Mike Smith and I, parishioner Mike Smith, trustee Mike Smith, and me, your humble servant, Father Jonathan. We're going over this book called "Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers," and just to go over some of the basic premise that he brought out before. What we talked about in this first part, and he's going to continue to go deeper into it, is that human beings naturally have this need to attach from a young age, and even throughout life, and those that we are attached to are the ones who orient our lives,
Right.
and that naturally that he doesn't evoke God too much, but he does a little bit. But so naturally, though, human beings were made to have this attachment with our parents, and they're made to orient our lives. They're kind of the moorings for our lives.
Right.
But he says, the author Gordon Neufeld says that these days, though, that's not so much the case, that children are having their primary attachment be their parents and being oriented by their parents, but instead, somewhat early on, their primary attachment is through children to peers. And so their orientation, their values, their culture, their language, it's coming from their peers, and their parents are left in a position where they're unable to parent their own children.
Parent in a way that they would naturally parent.
Right. An instinctual way.
Instinctually, yes.
So, and in that first part, so I just want to contrast the first part to the second part we're getting into. So the first part was called, that we discussed last time, and if you didn't get to watch the video, what would it be? Scroll down to the last video. It was a good discussion with Mike and I. And that first part was called the phenomenon of peer orientation. So he's getting into it like that kids are attached to other peers and oriented towards other peers. And he talks a little bit about how does that happen and why does that happen in our culture. The second part that we want to discuss tonight is called sabotaged. How peer orientation undermines parenting. So let's do this.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'll kick off a chapter. So we're starting here. And chapter 4 is page 47.
I guess the mini umbrella for this one was the question, as parents. The previous chapter we said one of the key questions was, do you sometimes feel like your kids have moved away from you, right? And I made the analogy of what it feels like when you send them off to kindergarten and they come back and suddenly they're spouting ideas they've gotten from the teacher and school rather than you. And that feels, I've kind of lost some. And of course, we've all parents have that feeling at some point. But this one, the question is, do you feel a sense of a loss of power as a parent?
Yeah.
So that's, what he uses as a way of of centering us on the idea that if you feel like you're losing power, then you probably have a child or children who are slipping into peer orientation. And I know we talked earlier about that word power doesn't we in America we certain people
Especially in a
have power.
relational context,
Right.
power sounds a little
Right.
dark or a little bit like, power dynamics in a relationship. What is that?
Yeah,
We're leery of abuse of
we
power.
are
Yeah.
leery of it, and for good reason.
Yeah.
But a parent without power,
Right.
you can't do the things that you're supposed to do
Right.
as a parent, and so
Right.
he's using that word in the best sense,
Right.
right? Uh, I've heard speakers say, power is not the problem. Somebody has to have power.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the president or the CEO, somebody has to have the power in any situation.
Yeah.
It's just how do you use that power?
Yeah.
And are you using it to be a servant?
Right.
Or are you using it to lord over others? And of course, he's talking about using it in the best sense of the word as
Yeah.
a guide, a parent.
So here's a little description of his
Mhm.
power, the power as he describes it. Um, he says the power that we have lost
Mhm.
in parenting is the power to command
Yes.
our children's attention,
Mhm.
to solicit their good intentions, to evoke their deference,
Mhm.
and secure their cooperation.
Mhm.
He says without these four abilities, all we have left is coercion or bribery, he
Right.
says.
Yes.
Yeah.
An external force.
External force. Yeah.
Uh, I love the fact that he says if you have legitimate power, maybe that's a word we should put in front of it.
Legitimate
Legitimate
power.
power.
Yeah.
You don't really have to use force.
Yeah.
If you don't have legitimate power, then you have to use force or bribery or some
Yeah.
some external method to get kids, students, coworkers, whatever, to do what you want them
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
And I think we know that to be true. There are certain people that you would do anything for because you love them, and you respect them. And yes, maybe for adults, you can think back to that coach, that teacher. Maybe it was your father, your mother. It, whatever they had asked me, I'd have done it for them.
Yeah.
Not because they forced you to,
You're right.
but because you had this love for them, this
Yeah.
attachment.
Yeah.
And he's saying it's the same thing even
Yeah.
with 4 and 5-year-olds.
Yeah. This is a great line that I like, which kind of frames it, this whole question of what kind of
Yeah.
influence should parents have
Hmm.
and what should it look like. He says it might be surprising to hear that parenting should be relatively easy.
Easy.
Like that. I mean, how many
Yeah.
parents hear that and go, "What?"
Right. Well,
Getting our child to
yes.
take our cues, follow directions, or respect our values should not require strain and struggle or coercion,
Mhm.
nor even the extra leverage of rewards.
Mm-mm.
If pressure tactics are required, something is amiss.
And for most people, there's what he's talking about. There are those
Yeah,
strategies that you have to
yeah,
have in order to
yeah,
get your kids to do what you need. And he's saying, no, you shouldn't need all those
yeah,
strategies. Those are the things that come about when we've lost our power, and now we have to figure out what do I have in replace of that? And he says nothing.
yeah,
You can try all those little strategies, how to say things, and they might help somewhat. But he said nothing can replace
yeah.
attachment in making parenting easier. In fact, he says there are 4 lies that we tell ourselves.
Go for it.
1, children don't need us. The kids these days are so good with technology and they're so independent. They know their way around the world. They
Right.
don't really need us. Wrong,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Wrong. Number 2, kids are difficult. Hear that all the time. Oh man, these kids are just so hard. Well, he's saying it. Parents didn't say that for all of our human history. It's just only been recently. No,
mm-hmm.
are there hard things? There are hard things about parenting.
Sure.
Getting up in the middle of the night with a sick kid is hard.
I'll take your word for it.
Yes, but kids should not be difficult. You just
Yeah,
said they should be easy,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Number 3, we are deficient as parents. We've talked about that
yeah.
before. We're not. We have instincts.
Right,
God gave them to us, and He said, abide in them,
right,
right? And number 4, it's just a phase. It'll
yeah,
go away.
yeah, It won't.
No, all of those
Yeah.
things are lies. And I love this line. He says, if you start to believe those lies, then children become a problem to fix, a collection of syndromes, not a person to love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And isn't that what we've tried to do? What's wrong with this child? How do we
Right.
fix him or her? He's saying, boy, now they become an object
Right.
instead of a human being.
I find him very empowering
Oh,
in
absolutely.
in just along these lines of what you're pointing out there, that he, because I love it how he doesn't. I think before he gives that list, he says these are the kind of the rationalizations
Yes.
that parents
Rationalization.
they feel
Great
like they
word.
have to tell themselves because
Hmm.
they know they have this broken relationship with their kids, and they want to put their finger on something. It's excruciating not to. But he has this empowering way of saying, "Hey, look, it's not you. Like you're a good human being. You
Yes.
have proper instincts, and it's not that your child's messed
No.
up either, but it's the
The
context. And if
context.
we can fix the context,
Right.
you know, then your natural instincts as a parent, you won't need all these. You won't need.
Hmm.
It'll come naturally, and if we fix the context, like you know, not that everything's gonna be perfect, but like children will be generally more agreeable, more
Yes.
yeah.
Hmm.
But
And notice you used the word empower.
yeah,
You
yeah,
came
yeah,
back to that
yeah.
word
Right,
power,
right,
power again. It is empowering, and I think that's his goal in saying that
yeah,
parenting should not be this hard. We want to give you some ways,
right,
not ways like all these different
right,
strategies, but the number one way,
right.
which is attachment. I love the example he had where they had a child and they went to three different psychologists and
You're right.
got three different diagnoses
Diagnosis, yeah,
and three different remedies.
right.
And he said, "Well,
Poor Sean, I think.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, who's right?" And that's it.
yeah,
Each one was an expert. He said,
yeah,
we start to abdicate our natural role as a parent to someone else saying, well, they got all these problems and here we'll try to fix them." Well,
right.
the, the
The
that
parents said they started to feel like they were relating to, instead of relating to a
yeah,
person, but relating to
right.
a diagnosis or a disease or something
And
like
that
that. And
creates distance,
right,
which is
right,
the opposite of what we're
right,
looking for in
right,
attachment. But it does take parents of, look, it's not that I'm a bad parent, it's just Johnny's got this syndrome and
right,
Susie's got this syndrome.
right,
And not that kids can't have things, yes, but it's a lot easier to deal with Johnny as a human being than as
right.
a syndrome.
His point there, I believe, is right. Even if children have um, ADD,
Mm-hmm.
OCD,
Right.
anxiety, right? The path towards like wholeness in the family is
Yes.
still a relational one.
Mm-hmm.
It's not still the answer, not that you don't have to in some ways individually address. I mean,
Right.
of course you're going to. Somebody's struggle with ADD,
Right.
somebody's
Right.
gonna, but that's not going to be a solution. The solution, as far as any disruption in the relationship, is not to mitigate um,
Mm-hmm.
these different psychological
Right.
struggles, but still to reestablish the relationship, the attachment, and I want to draw us real quick
Yes.
just before we move past it. Like
Yes.
so, he makes this connection between power and dependence,
Mm-hmm.
and he talks about so the power to parent, the ability to have this
Mm-hmm.
influence over your kids, that it's and maybe if you don't mind just giving any thoughts you have on this or what,
Mm-hmm.
but like the power to parent, it's connected to a child's dependence on their parents. And he says more than just like for food and shelter, but
Right.
their emotional dependence.
Emotional dependence.
And he talks about how he connects that dependence to attachment. Um, like, do you remember that section where,
Yes.
yeah,
Uh,
or
and,
do you have
and
any
again,
thoughts on that?
the whole idea of someone being dependent,
Yeah,
we talked a little bit about this last time. As Americans, we want to push our kids to independence. We're saying no, dependence is.
Right.
This is the paradox, right?
Right.
The more dependent they are on you, the more independent they'll be able to be. Which is, it's a crazy thing to think about,
Right.
but it's true. And part of that is, and we've mentioned it before, that he said that establishes the correct hierarchy.
Right.
That there has to be somebody in charge.
Right.
We can't be all egalitarian. Everybody gets to be equal.
Right.
No. And actually, kids don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
At a young age, they want someone who's saying, this is how things should be done because it's safer for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we sometimes think, well, we want to make sure that kids have a say and all that. Yeah, there has to be some of that, but until we establish that we have the power, and again, as a servant, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a
Mm-hmm.
servant, and children need to understand hierarchy as a way of entering into the church, entering
Mm-hmm.
in with a teacher, entering in with a coach. There has to be a hierarchy there, and being dependent upon an adult is a very good thing,
Right.
and you scaffold it, right? There's a great deal of dependence when they're an infant. When they're 10, it's a little less. When they're 12, it's a little less. But you're not just saying, you know what, you guys can figure it out. That goes back to
Right.
one of the lies that kids don't need us.
Right. Right. A
Yeah,
lie that parents tell themselves,
right,
oh, they're just becoming more
right.
independent, They're
And
not.
they're not. They're becoming
They're just depending
dependent
on
on someone else.
somebody else.
And
Yeah.
and that's not safe. And we're going to
Right.
find out in the next section more about why.
Right.
But he talks about 5 or 6 different things that he says will make parenting more enjoyable for you too.
Yeah.
Starting with the hierarchy. The second one he says is the more attached you are to your kids, the more tolerant you will be of the things that make parenting hard, not
What
difficult.
page are you on now? I want to catch up to
Uh,
you here.
I'm not sure exactly
Oh,
what
shoot.
page.
You're on your notes. That's
Yeah,
good. That's good.
yeah.
Yeah. Go
So
ahead, though.
so there are all sorts of things. We talked about getting out of bed at
Yeah.
midnight or whatever. He says if kids are attached to us, they become more endearing. That was his word,
Yeah.
not mine. Endearing, which is what? But it is. When a little baby smiles at you for the first
Yeah.
time, you melt. Okay, I'll change your diaper. I'll
Yeah.
get up at 2 in the
Right.
morning because that smile, that
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
When a 4-year-old comes in with a dandelion, Mom, look what I bought you, some
Mm-hmm.
beautiful flowers.
Right.
That's endearing enough that you'll do his laundry, even though he's soaked in mud, right?
Right.
He
Right.
said, the more attached you are, the more things that kids give
Mm.
back to you. And that's the natural way God wanted
Right.
it. If you are endearing to me, even the slightest little hint of
Right.
endearment, I will bend over backwards for you as a
Right.
parent. Not to spoil kids, but to do all the things that kids need
Need.
as they're
Yeah.
growing up.
Yeah.
And without attachment, you want to do that?
Right.
No, you
Right.
don't.
Right.
It's why, and I'm not really proud of this, but it's just the way it was. I had all sorts of nieces and nephews before I had my own kids, before I was even married,
Uh-huh.
and I liked holding them, and it was good.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't feel any burning desire to spend my entire day with them.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly didn't want to change diapers.
Yeah. Right.
Uh, it just it didn't register.
Right.
When I had my own daughter, it was like the switch flipped instantly. I wanted to hold her all day long. I don't
Yeah.
need anything else.
Right.
Yeah, I'll get up, honey. I'll get the diaper. Why? Well, there's something endearing about it being your own child
Yeah.
and in your arms and saying, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's the way God wanted it for
Right.
kids to melt our hearts, and
Right.
attachment does that.
Yeah. When the attachment's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Yeah. It's I don't mean to be crass, but it's the grease in the gears. It's like
Yeah.
it's the sugar in the tea.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah.
And the flip side is if that attachment leaves and goes to peers,
Yeah.
then we feel betrayed.
Yeah.
I mean, he,
Right.
he uses the metaphor of an affair, that you finding your joy elsewhere and not in me. That's 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 the way parenting feels like
Right.
an affair, like a spouse or a significant other is now finding their joy and turning their attention to someone other than you, and you feel betrayed.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's no longer endearing,
Yeah.
right? Um,
he says in this part, attachment keeps the child close to the parent.
Yeah. Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read a little bit.
Yes.
Perhaps the most obvious task of attachment is to keep the child close. When the child experiences his need for proximity in physical terms, as very young children do, attachment serves as an invisible leash.
Yeah.
Our offspring have this in common with many other creatures in
Right.
attachment who must keep a parent in sight, hearing, or smell.
It's
Um,
and he talks about how overwhelming that is when the child is young. You know,
right.
I remember my mom would when she was raising us, she would say she didn't understand it until she was raising us. Your grandma used to always say, "Can I just have 5 minutes to go to the bathroom by myself?"
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because she had all these 6 or 7 kids running around,
Yeah,
and you couldn't even find time to
yeah,
do that alone.
right.
Uh,
They'd want to follow you into the bathroom
right.
or whatever.
So,
Yeah,
but he's saying, as frustrating as that might be at times, where you
right.
just want to push. No, that's as it should be, and that
Yeah,
closeness is exactly what you want
right,
for attachment.
right,
You're going to trip over them for a lot of years,
right,
but that's where the attachment starts.
right.
Now, that's no guarantee it'll stay, but that's where it has to begin because you want your kids close to you, even as they move into the teenage years. You want them to stay
Yeah.
close.
There's this other great section. Attachment creates a model out of the parent.
Okay.
Adults are often surprised and even hurt when children under their care do not follow their lead in
Mhm.
how they conduct themselves and live their lives. Such disappointment springs from the misbelief that parents and teachers are automatic models for their children and
Mhm.
students. In reality, the child accepts as his models only those to whom he is strongly attached.
Yes. I think that's a daunting thing
Yeah,
for especially young people if you
yeah,
haven't been in a situation where you have to be a model.
yeah,
And I don't mean a role model
yeah.
because that's a little bit different where that's almost like you're trying to do that. A model
Sure.
just means I'm here and others are watching me and the next section he talks about is taking their cues from me.
Yeah,
Uh, for those of us who are teachers, we didn't have any choice. Here's 110 kids, you're a
right,
model.
right, right.
And so even before I became a parent, I was used to that role. But I've had people who get married and they're going to have kids and go, oh, I don't know. Do I have what it takes for a kid to look at me and say, this is the person I want to model my life after?
Yeah,
And, some of that, growing up with some of those people, I'd say, well, maybe not, maybe not yet,
yeah.
but you will. And here's,
Ooh, pardon me.
I think, something that we miss, Father,
Yeah,
and it's very important. We think that our role as a parent is to create children you know, who are motivated and kind and all those things.
mm-hmm.
But we forget that God gave us kids to make us adults.
Hmm.
When do you become most an adult? When you have to take responsibility.
Right, right,
When people start looking to you and saying, what next? Which
right,
way should we go? And no role gives you more than that than being a parent.
right,
Starting on day one, you are given complete responsibility for this child, and they, in a natural way, start looking to you as a model, and then they start taking their cues from you.
hmm.
This is how dad wears his hat.
Right,
This is how mom sits at the table.
right,
These are the things that kids start to without even us trying to be. We are becoming the models for them, and they're taking their cues. And he says, yes, thankfully, because when they turn 12 and 13 and 14, you want them to have modeled themselves after
right,
you.
right.
That keeps you close, and it makes sure that hopefully they're modeling what you believe is important
Mm-hmm.
and they're taking their cues from you, not what the young man down the street says or their buddies at school. They're taking their cues from you on the important things in life. That's a huge responsibility, but it turns us into adults because
Right.
now I have to say, what's my language like? How did I treat their mother there?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't treat their mother this way and tell them to treat her a different way. I can't say don't use those words when I'm using them. What about the way I approach things in life, like jobs,
Mm-hmm.
like relationships, like alcohol? How do my kids are watching? I
Yeah.
have to take that into consideration. I I w- I don't know if I was ever more proud of anyone when one of my students said, when my brother and I were born, my dad said, "I'm not going to drink anymore because you mean too much to me."
Hmm.
And I don't know whether he had a problem or whether he
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
because I didn't know him at that time. I knew him then,
Yeah.
and he was a great father.
Yeah.
And he was a fantastic role model for his sons.
Mm-hmm.
But it started early when he said, I have to take responsibility for all my behaviors
Yeah.
because my sons are watching.
Right. It's that love, though. I mean, yeah,
Right.
you need that attachment. You need that love and connection, and
And
with these endearing children that.
and then they become a gift to you, not a
Yeah.
burden.
Right.
Well, I
Right.
think we responsibility cramps our style. It does.
Mm-hmm.
When you're the one responsible for what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
you you have to look at things differently. It's going to take some of your time, and I don't. It doesn't
It's
matter
a
what. Yeah,
sacrifice.
whether you're
Yeah.
the priest in a parish, whether you're the head coach of a football team, whether you're a parent, to be the one that Dale Getke always says is wearing the shirt that says "I'm in charge."
Mm-hmm.
Dale's a parishioner of ours, because some days you get that shirt, you're going to wear it all day long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, that's a responsibility, and yes, it requires sacrifice. But what a gift that God has said, I believe there is nobody in this world who can be a parent to that child as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
giving you this child and saying,
Right.
you have that responsibility. That's what it's about.
Right.
That's what we want in life, the opportunity to have a sense of purpose and
How
influence.
much dignity the Lord
Oh,
puts on a human being by saying,
yes.
you know, Mike and Susan Smith, I'm gonna put into your hands these children, like the stewardship
Yes.
that you're given as
Yes.
as a as a father, and Susan as a mother, and like that's there's so he honors us so much by giving us that tremendous stewardship over things that he loves the most, out of all of his creation,
And
you know.
and when we start to look at it as being the dad or being the mom
Yeah.
is not something that I do,
Yeah.
it's who I am.
Who I am.
Then
It's not such a burden.
it's not a burden.
Yeah.
It becomes second nature. This is who I am.
Yeah.
And he's Neufeld is saying, with attachment thrown in there,
Right.
whoa.
Right.
Because the last one he says is the crown jewel. And the crown jewel is kids want to be good for you.
Hmm.
He said that's the crown jewel, because that's what people are going to see when you send them out into
Yeah.
public, right?
Right.
What parent doesn't like it when they go to parent teacher conferences and say, your son or your daughter is so good in class. Oh, whew, what a relief, because we don't know.
Yeah. Right.
Right? We
Right.
have no idea. We sent them off and we hope they're going to be really good for everybody.
Yeah.
Or the coach says they work hard, they treat everybody with respect. We go, yes. And part of that's why that's the crown jewel, because it's validating us and giving
Yeah.
us more incentive to continue the hard path of
Right.
parenting. But it's also the goal. That's what we want. We want people who are people of goodness.
Right. Right.
And so I think we sometimes forget that, as you said, it's a gift. It gives us dignity, gives us purpose. And what greater mission could there be?
Right. Right. For
And
sure.
attachment can make it a whole lot more palatable.
Right. 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 Um. There's these last sections here.
Yeah.
Does
The
this
counter will and all
counter
that.
will
Yeah.
why children become disobedient?
Right.
Do you want to touch on that part
Yeah.
of the book?
So we all have counter will, don't we? We don't like to be told what to do.
Right.
Maybe you don't. You don't have that, Father, or do you have that?
No, I have it more than anyone.
It's hard, isn't it?
You'd be hard pressed to find someone that likes their own will more than me. And
No, I believe you. You've
I
talked
wish
about this.
I wish it wasn't that way.
But
I'd rather
it is a
not be.
natural thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said we can't underestimate the power of that counter will, because God gave it to us. He's saying used correctly, it's a good thing because it allows you to listen to the right people and not
Yeah.
be forced into things that you know are wrong because you have counter will,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's natural and it's there. So I used to, and if we're on TV, you can see, I used to say to my kids, okay, put your hands together.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I want you to push as hard as you can
Mhm.
with your right hand, right? Push as hard as you can
And the left hand, it's there to resist it, right?
automatically.
Yeah,
And I said,
automatically.
wait a second, guys. I didn't say push with your left hand, but it
Yeah.
happens.
Right. Right.
And that's
Right.
counter will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Good analogy.
when
Good
you're
analogy.
pushing kids,
Yeah.
they will push back.
Yeah.
That's why, remember, we started at the beginning. If you
Yeah.
have power, you don't have to use force. If you don't have power, you have to use force.
Yeah.
My will is stronger than yours.
Yeah.
Well,
Let's see. Let's find out. It's a competition all of a sudden. Yeah.
have you ever had that experience where somebody was pushing you and you decided, I'm not going to let him push. I'll
Oh
push
yeah.
back,
Yeah.
right?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you might have
Yeah.
had it on the wrestling mat, on the football field,
Mhm.
you know, but that counter will can work for us too if we're
Mhm.
attached.
Mhm.
Then when others start pushing your
Right.
kids in a direction that they realize that's not where my attachment lies, they
Challenges their true values.
exactly
Yeah.
they will push back,
Right.
and we need that.
So is he draw out here that loyalty aspect again that comes with
Hmm.
attachment and how we're, you know, how we're more loyal where there's an attachment. And it's natural where if we have a primary
Yes.
attachment, say a child has a primary attachment to their friends, their
Hmm.
peers, it's only natural that they are going to use that counter will in opposition and in disobedience to the values you're trying to
Right.
direct them towards. Like it's kind of built
Oh,
into
it is.
how they
It's a
are.
natural instinct that's become disordered,
Yeah, yeah,
and then we start again. We lose the endearing part of our kids. They're so manipulative. They're
yeah,
always using me, always trying to control me.
yeah.
Well, he says there's no such thing as bad kids, just bad relationships.
Mm,
And wow, that's somewhat counterintuitive because
yeah.
we tend to label that kid's a bad kid. Maybe it's just the relationships that they're in
Mm-hmm.
have not given them the proper attachment. I mean, he's giving us a chance to look at kids in a different way, not just our own.
Yeah.
As a teacher, looking at our students, as parents, looking at the friends that our kids have. Uh, once we label a kid as bad, it's really tough for them,
Mm-hmm.
and then their counter will becomes even stronger.
Right. Right.
Well, it's a vicious spiral then.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I like the fact that he's giving us permission not to see our kids as controlling and manipulative, but just needing a different form of relationship. And if they don't, again, if they lose it with us, they will find it elsewhere. And the culture, the culture is such uh, it's so pervasive, and it's moved to the peer end of the spectrum so far. You know, in St. Charles at the
Mm-hmm.
elementary school, I don't know if you've been in there, Father, or not, but
I haven't yet.
you should, because there's something I find fascinating every time I go in there. Somebody had kept all of they used to, years ago, when they had, 20, 30, 40 kids in a grade, they
Uh-huh.
would take pictures, they would take their senior pictures, and they would put them on a big poster,
Hmm.
maybe like 3 feet by 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it would say St. Charles High School and class of 1961 or 1948. I mean, they go way back.
Wow. Cool.
And they'd have each kid on there, and they'd have the principal and the superintendent. Very, very formal. And you looked at those kids, and you thought, my goodness, they look like they're 28.
Yeah.
They had their hair combed
Yeah.
in an adult fashion, parted
Yeah.
on the side. They had a suit and a tie. The women had nice dresses on.
Yeah.
Every senior picture looked like someone who was ready to move into the adult world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you look at modern senior pictures, and I get it. You know, Johnny's got his softball or his football uniform on, and
Sure.
Susie's got her dance line uniform, and they're just kids.
Yeah.
And isn't that neat? And it is. That's who they were in high school. But years ago they were preparing to be adults.
Right.
Now we've gotten really happy with just let them be kids.
Right. And Neufeld talks about when there is adult orientation, when there's when the primary attachment's to parents, then adults are able to pass on this
Yes.
treasure trove
Treasure trove. Love that phrase.
of of you talk about modeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the modeling is taking place. Adults are modeling the
Mm-hmm.
children for this brief period of time where the children's in need of that,
Yes.
eh, however long that lasts. And when they're receiving that from the adults, it is maturing them naturally, right? But versus
Right.
if you have peer oriented attachment, you don't have this top down
No.
uh, gift giving from adults to children, like here's these good values, here's this way to behave in a nice dining room or whatever.
Right.
When the culture is what would you say,
Horizontal.
horizontal, like it's there's a lack of inheritance there. Like
Right.
how are
You-
children to
Right.
learn how to be adults from other children?
No.
I've this has baffled me for a long time, and this is like the first. It's baffled me for a long time. Why does it take? I perceive in myself, and I was very peer oriented growing
Mm-hmm.
up. Like God, I'm 39 years old. You know, um, and I wouldn't say I don't know. I want to be kind to myself, but like I can feel like a kid. Certain
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
I can ask the question, what age is? I'm 39. I definitely thought it would happen by now. At 45, will I feel like an adult? Like I'll be middle aged then. Shouldn't I
Mm-hmm.
feel like an adult? Anyways, but my point is like there is this natural maturing process. It's just being delayed. It's being
Mm-hmm.
pushed out. It's being
Right.
pushed out.
And the longer you push it out, we lionize that kind of behavior and say, "Well, isn't that great?" They're retaining that devil may care
Yeah,
attitude
yeah,
so
yeah,
long. I don't know. Maybe that's not something we should be promoting.
yeah.
He,
Right.
he's he says that, and so the
Yeah,
adolescent culture is a recent thing.
yeah.
There was no adolescent culture
Right,
60 years ago.
right,
There was the adult culture and there was children. There were children, and children moved to adult. They didn't get this, 17 to 27 where you get to kind of just
right,
bounce around it. No,
right,
you moved on.
right.
And he would say when the adolescent culture came in, and you can see it when you uh, watch movies, even as far back as the 50s, where the adolescent culture becomes a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it stand for? Well, we don't stand for anything, but we're against whatever adults are for.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
becomes their
yeah.
mantra. It's not
Right.
what are we for? Well, we're just for doing whatever you want, but we're mostly known for being against the adult culture.
Yeah.
And you have to be a tribe apart,
Reactionary.
completely reactionary.
Yeah.
And some of this is going to come up in the next section of cool becomes the end thing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
won't talk about it too much, but the fact that we've given adolescents, again, 16 to 25 or 27, whatever, we've given them
39.
39, we've given them a free pass.
Yeah.
You don't have to be an adult,
Yeah.
and it's okay to be in that tribe apart. Well, that encourages peer orientation.
Right. Right.
And I love this line. He says, adult culture frees individuals,
Hmm.
peer oriented culture imprisons them.
Yeah.
And it does, it imprisons them in this Peter Pan
Right.
syndrome.
Right.
I don't have to grow up. And in fact, we go, yes, refuse to grow up.
Yeah. But so
Hate the
unfulfilling.
man.
It's so
Right? Fight the man. It
unfulfilling.
is it's completely
They
unfulfilling.
never get they never get, like we were talking about, this dignity of the stewardship of
Right.
being mature enough to have this inheritance given to you.
Yes.
It's like, oh, the transfer is never
Right.
given over because yeah, it's a sad, yeah, it's a sad delay. One
A
that,
sad delay.
yeah, yeah. I've got to give a little pushback.
Yeah, push back.
Well, So I find, anyways, I I just don't want people to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because like I find peers my age who are peer oriented growing up like myself and who recognize, God, our generation's kind of like the yolk's a little bit soft here. Like, what's going? Why, why hasn't, why aren't we more mature? Anyways, I find conscientious adults my age like recognizing that there's a lack of maturity,
Hmm.
and it's good to then to like, okay, like, well, what do what does more mature look like and whatnot. But the mistake that's being made is they throw fun out.
Yes.
They throw fun out. No fun. Anyways, this is a rant, and this is selfish because it's just my own thoughts or whatever.
No.
But I hate it when I see that.
Hmm.
I hate it when I see people as they get older and take on more responsibility. They're like, oh, I can't have as much fun anymore, or something like that. Do you have any thoughts on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, I used to write to my students this quote. It's from Ben Stein. He said, "There exists absolutely no compelling evidence that life has to be serious."
Mm-hmm.
D- No.
I
Are
like
there
that.
serious things in life?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, right?
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
a diagnosis of cancer, that's pretty
Right.
serious.
Right.
But that life as a whole was never designed to be uber serious,
Right.
where we have to walk around glum, right? And
Right.
Pope Francis talked about that,
Right.
glum Christians.
Glum-faced
Yes.
Christians.
But there's a difference between being childish and
Yeah.
childlike.
Yeah.
And I think you have a childlike spirit, Father, because you enjoy
Thanks.
new things and meeting new people and trying new things. That's childlike. I'm curious. Wow, what's a one wheeler like?
Mm-hmm.
What would a podcast be like?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed, and those things are not inherently selfish. Where I think that's what you're saying about prolonging, delaying that adult world
I
is
selfishly want people my age and your age. I want us to have more fun, because
yeah.
you know what that means for me?
You get to have more
I
fun.
get to have more fun. You know what I mean? I want Mike Smith to play basketball, I, I want my other friends to be like down for board games
Yeah,
or whatever,
yeah,
or good
and maybe
wholesome leisure, because
yes,
it's less work for me. It's all selfish.
that's all.
It's all selfish. It's just less work for me than to have a good time. And I want to have a good time, Mike.
Maybe that's your calling, Father. You're
Yeah.
using your gifts to bring childlike fun into people's lives.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't have to work at it so hard, but I don't mind.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you probably do because when people get to a certain age, they start to say, "Well, that's
Well,
yeah,
yeah, and my point in going this is
yeah,
like it's a counter reaction
right,
to the reality that I think it's pretty self-evident that
hmm,
so many generations of young people have struggled to find their way
right,
into maturation.
hmm,
Like, I don't think it's any slight to anybody. I don't think anybody my age is offended at that. But I think it's just kind of a and to trot all the way back.
hmm,
I've never heard a very good argument for why is that the case. Although this is the best argument I've heard for, well, why is there such a why has the maturation been slowed down,
hmm,
and why is it so hard for it to speed back up? Well, it's because of this horizontal culture
yes,
instead of
hmm.
a vertical culture. But
And I think even you admitted at the start you became a fairly peer oriented kid,
oh,
and you
absolutely.
move into that culture, and then you become part of that tribe.
Right.
He calls it. I don't know. I don't think he's being tongue in cheek, cult like,
Yeah.
because
Right.
you have to believe everything that your tribe believes.
Right.
And boy, our world has made it easy to live in that phase of life for a
Right.
long
A
time,
long time.
right?
Yeah.
It's not, oh, you get until you graduate from high school and then
Right.
no, you can keep it going
Right.
forever, right?
We better wind down.
Yeah. Well, I
Are
think
there
we're
any big points you
no,
wanted to hit?
I think we hit them all. I think
Okay.
the next section is going to be how does it this is how it
Part 3.
attachment influences
Yeah.
the role of parents.
Yeah.
And now he's going to talk about what are some of the things that happen to kids when they become peer oriented. So uh, it's somewhat of a natural progression.
Yeah.
How does it affect parents? How does it affect kids? And then the last section, what do you do about it?
Yeah. it's called Stuck in Immaturity. How fitting, because that's what we're ending with.
Yeah, right,
How
exactly.
peer orientation stunts healthy development. Well, gosh, it's like I went there without going there.
No,
Yeah.
it's naturally leading to
Yeah.
that, right?
And we'll post a date for. So we moved from Facebook Live to now we're recording this ahead of time and editing it and putting it out. But but we'll come up with a date for when we're
Right.
meeting again and continuing the conversation. We hope you enjoy it. You're still
Right.
welcome to engage in it. If you want to ask questions,
Right. Ask
put
questions,
something in the
put it
comments.
right.
We can get back to you on it. But if you haven't bought the book yet, there's so much here. Hold on to your kids. Gordon Neufeld, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And as Mike and I have said before, like, this is certainly a book for parents, but it's
Mhm.
also a book really for everybody in our culture.
Right.
Priests, grandparents, single or
Right.
married. Like, it's really really beneficial for everybody because of the philosophy and the
Right.
principles
Right.
in it. So
Most people have kids in their lives some way, shape, or form. Nieces,
right,
nephews, like you said, grandparents have
right,
grandkids. We should all have a vested interest in kids.
yeah, yeah, yeah.